Good morning. So when I was younger, I never had to face any signs of gender inequality. In fact, me and my other brother, who was only a year younger than me, rode the same kind of bikes, we went to the same high school, we had similar activities, and I was even more of a tomboy because I enjoyed playing soccer and basketball, and I never felt that there was anything wrong with me because I was a woman. My name is Sherihan, and I come from a Palestinian village by the name of Abu Ghosh that is located right between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And so eventually I came to realize that this gender equality that was fully practiced by my family and my society was very limited. And it was very restricting, and it was limited to a specific age. And so as I grew up and I hit puberty, I realized that I was now going into the face of gender inequality. And I started realizing that there were certain things that I was being restricted from doing because of my gender. Fortunately, I was able to escape all these limitations and restrictions, and I attended the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia for 4 years of my life. So for 4 years, I was able to escape all these limitations of gender inequality, and I attended a university and had a really great time. But rather than stay in the States and find a lucrative job, I decided that I wanted to take all my knowledge and all my wisdom and bring it back home to this village to bring gender equality. And I saw myself as a warrior, and I would just go back and fight for women's rights, and everything would be great. And then I could go back to doing what all UPenn students wanted to do, which is make money and go to consulting companies, et cetera, et cetera. So I realized I went back home, and I went to Abu Ghosh, and I called my parents. I said, Mom, Dad, I'm coming home. I want to do this, except I have one condition. I don't want a curfew. I don't want to be back home at 7 or 8 p.m., which was something that was very common back home. Women would be back in their houses by 7 or 8 p.m., and I didn't want that. I had a lot of work to do. There were things that I wanted to go out and explore. And they said, yes, of course, Sherihan, just come back, Habibti, everything will be fine. And so I came back, and I came to Abu Ghosh. And apparently, me and my parents' definitions of freedom were a little bit different. And I don't have to go into details about what kind of freedom college students have at UPenn. But they were definitely not the same freedoms that a woman in Abu Ghosh and the freedoms that my parents had in their minds. And so slowly, being my rebellious self, and I was so angry and I was constantly frustrated. And so me and my parents were always arguing and fighting. I said, why? Why do I have to be so limited? Why do I have to be back home at 7 or 8 p.m.? It doesn't make any sense. I have work to do. I need to go out. And their answer was never logical. It was never rational. But it was very simple. The only answer they gave me was, what would society think? And so the problem that they had with me being out late at night wasn't the fact that I was being out late at night, because they knew that I was out late at night when I was on college campus. It was the reputation. And back in my society, the reputation of one family member is greatly influenced by the reputation of all the other family members. So if society started looking at me negatively, then my whole family was at fault. It wasn't just Sherihan. It was Sherihan, the daughter of Yaqub, from the family of Abdel-Rahman, and everyone knew everyone, so it was quite complicated. So from my personal experiences as a woman in Abu Ghosh, I realized that I still needed to change. And I started working for a nonprofit organization called the Abraham Fund Initiatives, which works for the minority of Arab rights in the state of Israel. And during my experiences, I was the media coordinator, so I talked to a lot of women who enrolled in our projects. And I went one day to talk to one of these women. So for me, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to start on this gender equality mission by changing the laws and politics. And so I started talking to these women, and I came across a woman who was very passionate and very excited to tell me her story. So she started talking to me. And she basically said, Sherihan, look, I came from a place where My husband used to beat me. I got married at 18. I never wanted to get married at 18, but they promised me that they would give me an education, and that promise was never fulfilled. Once I had 4 kids and I raised them, I started nagging my husband, wanting to get an education. Finally, he succumbed to my wishes, just so that I would stop nagging. He still beat her. And her in-laws would call her names, saying, "You're stupid, you're dumb, why would you even want to get an education?" Rip her books apart. So she went through the course, and finally she wanted to take the test. And her husband prevented her from going to the test room that day and taking the test. And she went anyway, and she was shaking in the testing room, and the professor came up to her and he said, "Why are you shaking?" She said, "Well, my husband doesn't know I'm here, and if he only knew what I was doing." So he's like, "Leave the testing room, take a deep breath, come back when you're ready." She leaves the testing room, calls her husband, everything's fine, comes back, takes the test, and actually succeeds. And she was telling me, "Sherihan, I had enough. Once I had that test in my hand, I filed for a divorce." And you know, it was amazing, but that's not what happens. That's not the norm. That's not common. And so here I was thinking, well, in Israel, there are laws against domestic violence. And you know, the political discourse is very different from that of the Arab world. So why wasn't this woman, who is very passionate and clearly very strong, taking advantage of the legal route? And I realized that the laws don't really matter. You know, I could do laws on politics, and I could go through the law and political route, but they might not have such a big effect, because laws do need to change. You know, the passing on of citizenship, the driving ban in Saudi Arabia, rights to free travel, they do need to change. The problem with a lot of Arab societies is that laws don't necessarily translate into enforcement. And so if you have laws preventing domestic violence or preventing honor crimes, they're not necessarily practiced, especially by the societies, and especially by societies that are extremely family-oriented. And so I wanted to do something different. I said, okay, I'm going to work on gender equality via the men. Why don't I give gender workshops to men and youth? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have power. If a brother realizes, has some sort of gender awareness, then maybe he'll allow his sister, or he'll stand up for his sister when she wants to get an education or when she wants to get a job. And I had a brother who was always supporting me, and I had a father who always supported me. And I know that the support of men in my family was extremely important in my own personal success. And then I realized that where I was, everyone knew me. And I didn't necessarily have credibility because I had gotten a Western education, and I came back home. And so to them, I was this Arab girl who had a Western education and had no idea what I was doing. They didn't even understand why I came back home. So I decided to pick up and go to Jordan and start working on gender equality rights in Jordan. And so I would start this initiative, targeting youth and men, and I started doing field research, and I did field assessments. And I would go to these community-based organizations, and there were 2 case studies that I came across that made me shift my thought process again. And so I met these women, and one of the community center leaders was telling me a story. She said, this girl, she ran away from her house because of a domestic violence situation. She was being beat up by her parents. The problem is, she came to me, and I couldn't report her situation to the police, because if I had reported her situation to the police, she came from a tribal family, they would shut the whole community center down. So I was between a rock and a hard place, and she had to just go back to her family. The second situation I came across was when me and my colleagues, who were also doing the field assessment with me, went to a restaurant. And the restaurant was segregated. So there was men at the first level, and then there were families on the second level. And so I was shocked that this was happening 10 minutes outside of the modern developed city of Amman. And I was like, no, 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 this can't be. I want to sit where the men are sitting. And so the waiter came up to me, and he's like, excuse me? It's policy, ma'am, we can't change it. And I was like, no, no, you can. They're seeing me already. I'm in the restaurant. What difference would it make if I go and sat next to them at the same table? Besides, I'm not here with my family. I'm here with my colleagues. And the second level was for families. And the guy was like, no, sorry, this is policy. You don't like it, leave. And so the manager came up to me, and he started talking to me. He said, what's wrong? So he didn't necessarily agree with what I had to say, but he definitely wanted to shut me up because there were customers coming and going, and he was losing business. I said, young lady, you want to sit there? It's fine, go ahead and sit there. Now, I felt like a champion. I went to my colleagues and I said, okay, we can sit on the first floor, not a problem. And what shocked me was that the Jordanian girl that was with me was angry, and she said, Sherihan, what are you doing? You're changing the culture, and that's unacceptable. And I said, excuse me? I said, Wajd, and this was a girl who did not wear a hijab, smoked, drove her own car, lived in Amman, did not have to deal with this culture. I said, Wajd, if you had to live here for one day and you survived, I would never speak again. But I know that if you stayed here one day and you couldn't smoke your cigarettes, you would not be able to survive. And the reason for why these laws are in place, the same reasons these laws are in place here, are the reasons for why women in Saudi Arabia can't drive. And it was really disheartening to me to see that women themselves were not being aware of the problems and the rights that they had. And so in Palestine, there was a totally different situation. The women understood their rights, but they had no means by which to channel them. In Jordan, it was completely different. And so again, I had to change my plan and my project. And I decided that I would work in 5 or 6 communities in Jordan that were more or less poverty pockets, and I would have, instead of working with men, I would go back to working with women, because I can't work with men if the women themselves don't have the basic understanding of what gender equality and gender awareness is. And so I decided that I would have a project, and we would meet once a week for 12 months, and every month we focus on a specific issue. So as you see, I'm not using gender and women's right from a Western perspective. What I want to do is provide this whole topic, provide a space for it from a traditional cultural perspective. So I wanted to talk about women in Arab culture, women in Islam. I didn't necessarily want to take out the traditional and the cultural sense to my project. And so, so we'd be combating issues of gender within the context and the framework of these women's daily lives. And again, we'd meet once a month. Every month would have a specific topic. And so the way the month is structured is the first week would be an introductory week to the issue. The second and third week would constitute of dialogue. And so what I want is for these women on their own to come up with their own sense of what is right and what is wrong. I didn't want to come here and enforce my thoughts on them, but what I do want to do is provide a space for them to be able to engage each other and be able to come up with their own sense of what's right and what's wrong. And through all these transformations and through all my work in the past 2 years after coming back from college, what I realized was not everything that is faced can be changed. When I went to Abu Ghosh, I always thought that I would change things, but I didn't necessarily think that I could. And I didn't think that I could, but I knew that, again, nothing that can be changed until it is faced. And so this quote resonated very well with me, and I realized that I myself was going through self-transformations as my project was going through transformations. Thank you so much for listening.